So I'm going to start this video by talking about this phrase you may have heard, the Queen's English. And when people use the phrase, what they're saying is that there is a perfect, idealised form of the language, perhaps to which we should all aspire. So there are other forms of English, regional dialects and so on, but at the apex, the best form of English is the Queen's English. Now, I'm not sure that this makes any sense for two reasons. Firstly, a language such as English is hugely dynamic. There are words coming into use all the time and the words going out of use. It's used by several countries around the world as their main language, so who's to say that the Queen's English is the correct English? Is someone who comes from Manchester or Melbourne, for example, speaking a lesser form of the language than the Queen? I'm not sure that this makes any sense at all, and given that there are more Americans who are speaking English than there are British people, maybe we should be talking about the President's English rather than the Queen's English. The second reason I think that the phrase makes no sense is that the Queen herself has a very peculiar accent. She has this tendency to squash and elongate all of her vowels. So instead of saying hello, she says hello. And instead of pleased to meet you, she goes pleased to meet you. Everything is squashed and sounds very strange. So I'm not sure that if you're learning English, the Queen's accent is something that you really want to emulate, unless you happen to be a billionaire who lives in a palace. But then the Queen isn't like the rest of us. I once heard a comic talking about her, and he was saying that he thought the Queen probably thinks that the whole world smells of fresh paint, because there's this army of people that have to go out in front of her, cleaning everywhere she goes, making sure that everything is spotless and any ugly street art is covered over before she gets there. Now, we have a word that we use in English to describe street art, and it begins with the letter G. G is for graffiti. G is for graffiti. Let's dive straight in with a definition. Graffiti, noun, words or pictures that are written, painted or drawn in public places. Now, normally at this point in these videos, I'd introduce some synonyms, words with a similar meaning, but I'm not sure that graffiti actually has any synonyms in English. However, graffiti itself can be incredibly varied. It can range from stuff like this. These are tags, they're called tags, by local artists who are basically just signing their name on public walls or the sides of tube trains, for example. But graffiti can also include works of art like this. Banksy painted this in 2018 in the Welsh village of Port Talbot. It appeared overnight, and rather than wanting to take it down, the local residents were incredibly protective and proud of the artwork. In fact, it was eventually sold to a collector for over £100,000. He had to buy the entire garage in order to actually move the artwork. Now, you might be thinking that, strictly speaking, the word graffiti is not an English word. And you'd be right, it's something that we've stolen from the Italians. But in that regard, it's not alone. There are hundreds of words that we use regularly in English that we have simply taken from other languages. But we don't call them stolen words or taken words. We call them loan words. Loan word. Noun, a word that has been adopted by the speakers of one language from another. Personally, I think loan word is something of a misnomer, an inappropriate title, because a loan is something that you pay back, whereas we've obviously got no intention of giving the word graffiti back to the Italians anytime soon. But I thought I'd use this video as a chance to talk about some of the other loan words that we use regularly in the English language, starting with a couple of French ones. And the first word I'd like to talk about is entrepreneur. Now, an entrepreneur is a business person who does deals. Let's take a look at the word used in a sentence. It's been said that Trump was never really a very successful entrepreneur. Much of his wealth was inherited. I read once that if he'd simply invested the money that he got from his father, if he'd simply invested it in the stock market, he wouldn't be any less wealthy than he is today. But anyway, Donald Trump, is a classic example of an entrepreneur. It's been said that George W. Bush, the former US president, once said this to Tony Blair: "The trouble with the French is that they don't have a word for entrepreneur." Unfortunately, no one actually recorded this meeting, and Tony Blair won't confirm whether George W. Bush actually did say this or not. But we can be sure that he said the following: "I think we can agree the past is over." Well, I suppose there's no arguing with that kind of logic. But let's take a look at a second word that the English language has stolen from French. Rendezvous. Rendezvous. It's both a noun and a verb, so we can use it like this: "The spies had arranged to rendezvous beside the lake, a favourite rendezvous of many secret agents." Now, to rendezvous is to meet, but in a secretive or clandestine manner. So you don't rendezvous with friends for a pizza, for example. Now, the next two loan words I'm going to talk about come to us via German, and they're both very different from one another. So the first one is kindergarten, a noun. A kindergarten can help a child develop their basic social skills before they start attending formal classes. Now, in German, Kinder means children and Garten means garden. And kindergarten, in English, is a preschool. It's a place where 3 and 4-year-olds can go to develop their social skills, to get used to being around each other before they formally enter the education system. Now, a very different noun that we've stolen from the Germans is Schadenfreude, the pleasure you take from someone else's misery. So we could use it in a sentence like this: "Even if their own club doesn't win, a football fan can usually enjoy the Schadenfreude of seeing their most bitter rivals lose." Now, I can remember the time when it seemed like Manchester United were always going to win the English league. They just seemed to win every match that they played. So whenever they did lose, which was very occasionally at the time, most of the rest of the nation rejoiced. And that was a case of Schadenfreude. We were taking a little pleasure at seeing their pain just for once. Even if their own club doesn't win, a football fan can usually enjoy the Schadenfreude of seeing their most bitter rivals lose. I find it incredible that us Brits couldn't invent our own word for Schadenfreude, so I guess we'll just have to carry on using the German one for now. The next two words I want to talk about entered the English language via Spanish, and the first of them is guerrilla, which refers to a soldier who isn't part of a formal army. Maybe they're a freedom fighter or something like that. So you might see the word used in a sentence like this: "By hiding out in the jungle, the guerrillas had eluded the government forces for years." In Spanish, you pronounce the word guerrilla, with the two L's together giving us a Y sound. But on entering the English language, it's got a hard L sound at the end of it. So we have to be careful to distinguish between a guerrilla and a gorilla. Guerrilla, someone with a gun. Gorilla, large ape. Guerrilla, gorilla. There's not very much difference in the pronunciation between the two, but as you can see from their images, startlingly different in the real world. The next word I want to talk about is tortilla, where we have adopted the Spanish pronunciation, tortilla. You'd have thought if we had guerrilla, we'd have tortilla, but it's not the case. We have tortilla, and that refers to either the dipping chips or the wraps that you get in a Mexican restaurant. So I could say, whenever I go to a Mexican restaurant, I stuff myself with tortillas and dips before the main plates arrive. However, ironically perhaps, what the Spanish would call a tortilla, a dish made from potatoes, onions and eggs, we'd just call a Spanish omelette. So there you go. These movements from one language to another are sometimes imperfect. Whenever I go to a Mexican restaurant, I stuff myself with tortillas and dips before the main plates arrive. Now, the next couple of words I want to talk about have come into the English language via Japanese. And the first one is origami, the art of folding paper. And we really don't have any other synonyms for that in the English language. So you might hear it in a phrase like this. Because the children have been stuck indoors, they've made much more origami animals this year. And there for you, I found a picture of a nice red dragon made out of folded paper. The next Japanese word I want to talk about is tsunami, meaning a giant wave. Back when I was a child, I think we only used to talk about tidal waves, but that's gone out of fashion, and now we have tsunamis. It's said that a landslide on the island of La Palma could create a tsunami that would reach New York. Now, I've read that there is a very real danger that this could happen, that part of the island of La Palma in the Canaries could actually fall into the sea. And if this were to happen, it would provoke an enormous wave that could actually reach the eastern coast of the United States. It's said that a landslide on the island of La Palma could create a tsunami that would reach New York. Now, because I started with an Italian word, graffiti, I'd like to finish with another one, paparazzi, another noun. And the paparazzi are those guys, it's usually guys, that follow celebrities around with their cameras taking photographs that they're going to sell to either the newspapers or the websites these days. So you could hear the word in a sentence like this. The intrusion of the paparazzi into a star's life must be annoying. But when the paps disappear, so does that star's career. You'll notice that in that sentence, in addition to the word paparazzi, I've also used the word paps, the paps. Often we simply reduce the word, the paparazzi, to a much shortened form with just the one syllable, the paps. Maybe the Italian word is just too complicated for us Brits. However, I think the sentiment of the sentence is true. The paparazzi are probably really annoying when you're famous, but then you'll probably miss them when they're gone. The intrusion of the paparazzi into a star's life must be annoying, but when the paps disappear, so does that star's career. I started this video talking about the Queen's English and asking whether the term really made any sense. Is it really possible to define a perfect version of English that we should all aspire to be speaking? I think not, because as we've seen over the course of the video, the language is changing all the time and adopting words from other languages as well. Words that sometimes we pronounce in a similar manner to the originals and sometimes we really don't. And so I think that's the lesson that we keep learning in this series, that English is always going to surprise us. I'll catch you on the next one.